What if I told you there's a place in America where children are taught three simple rules from birth? Don't look at the trees after dark. If you hear your name called in the woods, know you didn't. And if you hear whistling at night, pretend you're already asleep. These aren't childhood games or campfire stories. These are survival instructions passed down through generations in Appalachia's most cursed town, where something ancient and malevolent has been hunting for over 2 centuries. Tonight, I'm taking you deep into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, to a place so terrifying that even the Cherokee refused to settle there permanently, calling it the place where the earth bleeds. This is where Mother Tabitha earned the name Bone Lady, after an entire generation of children mysteriously died under her care, where Grandma Thorne summoned the devil by shooting a handkerchief at the sun, and the cloth bled for 3 days straight, where hikers still follow a phantom man in 1900s work clothes, only to watch him vanish into thin air at the exact spot where 13 missing persons were last seen. What makes these 12 stories absolutely bone-chilling isn't just their supernatural elements. It's that every single one has been documented, witnessed, and verified by multiple sources. From the Bell Witch that poisoned John Bell Sr. in 1820 to the trail camera footage captured just last month, showing something with too many joints moving through the forest, these encounters span over 200 years of continuous terror. The most disturbing part? The pattern suggests whatever lives in these mountains isn't just randomly attacking. It's learning, adapting, and getting stronger. You see, Appalachia isn't just America's oldest mountain range. It's a place where the veil between our world and something far more sinister has worn dangerously thin, where families have lived for generations without ever speaking about what they've seen, because some knowledge is too dangerous to share, where the trees themselves seem to watch you, and the shadows move independently of their sources. Tonight you're about to discover why locals say the mountains remember everything, and why they never, ever forget those who break the rules. But I have to warn you, once you hear these stories, you'll understand why people who've lived in these hollers their entire lives still refuse to go into the woods alone, why they hang haint blue bottles from their porches, and why they teach their children that some sounds in the night should never be acknowledged. Because in Appalachia's most cursed town, the difference between the living and the dead isn't as clear as you might think, and something has been waiting patiently in those ancient mountains for someone foolish enough to come looking for it. Are you ready to learn why the Appalachian Mountains are considered the most haunted place in America? Because after tonight, you'll never look at those rolling hills the same way again.
Story 1. The Bell Witch's Deadly Promise.
In 1817, the Bell family of Robertson County, Tennessee, thought they were living the American dream on their prosperous farm, until the night something began scratching at their walls from the inside. What started as mysterious knocking sounds quickly escalated into a supernatural nightmare that would claim a life and haunt the family for generations. The entity, which came to be known as the Bell Witch, didn't just make noise. It spoke, identifying itself as Kate Batts, a neighbor who had died years earlier after a bitter land dispute with John Bell Sr. But this wasn't your typical poltergeist activity. The Bell Witch displayed an intelligence and malevolence that defied explanation, engaging in lengthy conversations with visitors and demonstrating intimate knowledge of events happening hundreds of miles away. It would quote scripture perfectly, then immediately follow with the most vile profanity imaginable. The entity seemed particularly fixated on John Bell Sr. and his teenage daughter Betsy, subjecting the girl to physical torment that left visible marks, slapping her face until it was red and swollen, pulling her hair so violently that witnesses could see clumps being yanked from her scalp, and sticking her with invisible pins that drew real blood. The terror reached its peak when the Bell Witch made a chilling promise. It would kill John Bell Sr. within the year. As the months passed, Bell's health mysteriously deteriorated. He suffered from facial twitching, difficulty swallowing, and episodes where his tongue would swell so severely he couldn't speak for days. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell Sr. was found unconscious in his bed. When the family discovered a strange vial of dark liquid in the medicine cabinet that no one recognized, the Bell Witch's voice filled the room with triumphant laughter, declaring, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him." The liquid was immediately thrown into the fire, causing flames to shoot up the chimney in an unnatural blue blaze. John Bell Sr. died that same day, and at his funeral, the Bell Witch's cackling laughter echoed through the cemetery as mourners tried to pay their respects. The entity had kept its deadly promise, proving that some supernatural forces don't just haunt, they hunt with methodical, terrifying precision. What makes this story even more chilling is that the Bell Witch Cave still exists today in Adams, Tennessee, and visitors continue to report unexplained phenomena, suggesting that whatever killed John Bell Sr. over 200 years ago may still be waiting in those limestone depths, patient and hungry for its next victim. The most disturbing aspect of the Bell Witch encounters wasn't the physical manifestations, or even the murder. It was the entity's obvious intelligence and its ability to form relationships with some family members while tormenting others. It would sing lullabies to the youngest Bell children while simultaneously terrorizing Betsy, demonstrating a calculated cruelty that suggested this wasn't random supernatural activity, but something far more sinister, a malevolent intelligence that understood exactly how to break a family apart, one member at a time.
Story 2. The Bone Lady's Harvest.
In the remote hollers of northern Appalachia, where the nearest neighbor might be a day's walk through treacherous mountain paths, and winter could cut off entire communities for months at a time, there lived a woman who became the answer to every working parent's prayers. Mother Tabitha appeared in the settlement sometime in the late 1800s, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who claimed to be a widow seeking a new start after losing her family to consumption. She had an almost supernatural way. With children, they would stop crying the moment she held them, follow her instructions without question, and seem genuinely happy in her care. When harvest season came and parents needed to work from dawn until dusk to ensure their family's survival through the brutal mountain winters, Mother Tabitha was always there, never asking for payment beyond a hot meal and a place by the fire. The community embraced her as a godsend, and why wouldn't they? She knew old mountain remedies for childhood ailments, could calm the most difficult children with stories and songs, and seemed to genuinely love caring for the little ones. Parents would return from backbreaking days in the fields to find their children clean, fed, and peacefully sleeping, with Tabitha quietly mending clothes or preparing simple meals. She became woven into the fabric of their isolated society, invited to every community gathering, consulted on matters of child rearing, and trusted so completely that families would leave their children with her for days at a time when emergencies arose. But the indigenous peoples who had once lived in these mountains had fled the area generations earlier, leaving behind only whispered warnings that the white settlers dismissed as superstition. They spoke of the Bone Lady, a creature that fed on innocence and trust, who could take any form but always revealed her true nature through the children who withered in her presence. The tribal elders had tried to warn the first white families, but their words were lost in translation and cultural misunderstanding. What the settlers heard as folklore about evil spirits was actually a desperate attempt to protect them from something far more real and infinitely more dangerous than any supernatural entity. The first signs of something terribly wrong were subtle, enough to be explained away in a time when child mortality was tragically common in isolated mountain communities. Children would develop mysterious illnesses while under Tabitha's care, strange fevers that came and went without pattern, unexplained bruises that appeared overnight, and a peculiar listlessness that seemed to drain the life from their eyes. Parents noticed their children becoming increasingly withdrawn after spending time with Mother Tabitha, but she always had reasonable explanations. The mountain air was harsh on delicate constitutions, she would say, or perhaps the children were simply growing up and becoming more serious as mountain children often did when they learned the harsh realities of their isolated existence. What no one realized was that Mother Tabitha had developed a sophisticated system of psychological manipulation that allowed her to abuse children while maintaining their silence and the community's trust. She would tell the children elaborate stories about special secrets they shared, convincing them that the strange games they played together were normal expressions of love that all children experienced with their caregivers. She created a twisted mythology around their interactions, telling them they were chosen for special attention because they were braver and more mature than other children. When children showed signs of distress or tried to tell their parents about uncomfortable experiences, Tabitha would convince them that their parents wouldn't understand these grown-up relationships and might even be angry with them for participating. The physical abuse was carefully calculated to avoid detection, in an era when medical knowledge was limited and privacy was respected. Tabitha would use methods that left minimal visible evidence, focusing on psychological torment and violations that children couldn't articulate or that adults would dismiss as childhood imagination. She had an uncanny ability to read each child's psychological vulnerabilities, exploiting their need for attention, their fear of abandonment, or their desire to please adults. Some children she would starve slowly, convincing them that eating less would make them more spiritual and closer to God. Others she would force to participate in degrading rituals that she framed as necessary preparations for adulthood. The most insidious aspect of Mother Tabitha's predation was how she used the community's own values against them. In a culture that prized obedience, hard work, and respect for elders, she taught children that submitting to her demands was a virtue. She would quote scripture to justify her actions, telling children that suffering in silence was godly, and that questioning adult authority was sinful. She created elaborate theological justifications for her abuse, convincing children that their pain was a form of spiritual purification that would make them stronger and more worthy of God's love. As months turned to years, the pattern of childhood, illness, and death in the community became impossible to ignore. But Mother Tabitha had positioned herself so skillfully that suspecting her seemed not just unlikely, but almost blasphemous. She was the one who comforted grieving parents, who helped prepare small bodies for burial, who knew exactly what to say to ease the pain of loss. She had made herself indispensable to the community's emotional survival, creating a situation where questioning her meant questioning the very foundation of their support system during their darkest moments. The truth about Mother Tabitha only began to emerge decades later, when one of her victims, now a grown man who had moved far from the mountains, finally found the courage to speak about his childhood experiences. His testimony opened the floodgates, and other survivors began to come forward with stories so horrific that many people refused to believe them. The accounts revealed that Tabitha hadn't just been neglecting or even physically abusing the children in her care. She had been conducting systematic psychological torture designed to break their spirits completely. She had created elaborate scenarios of terror, convincing children that monsters would come for their families if they didn't comply with her demands, or that their parents had secretly asked her to punish them for imaginary transgressions. The investigation that followed revealed evidence that Mother Tabitha had been moving from community to community throughout Appalachia for decades, always presenting herself as a helpful widow seeking a new start, always targeting isolated settlements where her crimes could continue undetected for years. She had refined her methods over time, learning exactly how to exploit the trust and desperation of struggling mountain families. The discovery of her true nature sent shockwaves through the region, as communities realized they had been harboring a predator whose evil was so profound it seemed to corrupt everything she touched. The most chilling revelation was that Mother Tabitha had kept detailed records of her crimes, documenting not just what she had done to each child, but also her observations about which methods were most effective at breaking their resistance. These journals revealed a mind so twisted and calculating that even experienced investigators struggled to comprehend the depth of her depravity. She had treated the children's suffering as a form of scientific experiment, carefully noting which combinations of physical abuse, psychological manipulation, and spiritual corruption produced the most complete submission. The legacy of the bone lady continues to haunt northern Appalachian communities to this day. Many families still refuse to allow anyone outside their immediate family to care for their children, a tradition that has persisted for over a century without most people remembering its origins. The indigenous people's warnings about the bone lady weren't supernatural folklore. They were a desperate attempt to protect innocent lives from a human monster whose evil was so profound it seemed to infect the very land itself. Local folklore speaks of certain hollows where children's voices can still be heard on quiet nights, forever trapped in the place where their innocence was stolen by the woman they trusted as mother. Even today, when strangers offer to help with childcare in isolated mountain communities, old-timers will shake their heads and mutter about the Bone Lady, though few can explain exactly why the name fills them with such dread. The mountains remember everything, locals say, and some evils are too great to ever be completely forgotten. Mother Tabitha's crimes didn't just destroy individual lives, they shattered the fundamental trust that held these isolated communities together, creating wounds that continue to influence how mountain families protect their children generations later.
Story 3. Grandma Thorne and the Devil's Contract.
In the shadow of Clay County, West Virginia's most forbidding peaks around the year 1900, a young bride named Ira discovered that marrying into the Thorne family meant inheriting a legacy of terror that stretched back generations. Her new husband had warned her about his grandmother, but nothing could have prepared Ira for the reality of Grandma Thorne, who lived alone in a converted schoolhouse at the edge of a forest clearing where no birds sang and no wildflowers grew. The old woman had hung thick blankets over every window, creating a darkness so complete that even during the brightest summer days, the interior remained as black as a tomb. Neighbors whispered that she preferred the darkness because light revealed too much about what she had become, and some claimed that mirrors would crack in her presence, unable to reflect what she truly was. The local legend surrounding Grandma Thorne was both specific and terrifying in its details. According to witnesses who claimed to have seen the ritual with their own eyes, she had climbed to the highest hilltop in Clay County on a moonless night, carrying an old flintlock rifle and a white handkerchief. There, she had cursed God's name 3 times, each blasphemy echoing across the mountains like thunder, before firing a single shot through the handkerchief directly at the sun as it rose over the eastern peaks. What happened next defied all natural explanation. The hole in the cloth began to ooze blood, thick and dark, continuing to drip for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. This, the locals believed, was the devil's way of accepting her offer, marking her as his servant on earth, and granting her powers that no mortal should possess. But Grandma Thorne's supernatural abilities came with a price that extended far beyond her own soul. The forest around her converted schoolhouse became a place where children would disappear if they wandered too close, where hunters would find animal carcasses arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, and where the very air seemed to whisper promises of things better left unknown. She could predict deaths with uncanny accuracy, always knowing exactly when someone in the community would pass away, and often describing the manner of their demise in disturbing detail. More unsettling still, she seemed to have intimate knowledge of people's darkest secrets, their hidden shames and buried sins, information she would use to manipulate and control anyone who crossed her path. The situation reached a horrifying climax when a local man named Henry vanished without a trace during what should have been a routine hunting trip. The entire community organized search parties, combing every hollow and ridge for days without finding so much as a footprint. When the exhausted women returned from yet another fruitless day of searching, Grandma Thorne emerged from her darkened schoolhouse with a knowing smile that chilled them to the bone. "I know exactly where Henry is," she told them with absolute certainty, her voice carrying an undertone of dark amusement. "Your husbands know too. They know precisely what happened to him." The implication was clear and terrifying. Henry hadn't simply gotten lost in the wilderness, and his disappearance wasn't an accident. Within a week of Grandma Thorne's ominous pronouncement, the old woman was found dead in her converted schoolhouse, shot through one of her blanket-covered windows by an unknown assailant. The official cause of death was listed as murder by person or persons unknown, but everyone in Clay County understood the real reason she had died. The question that haunted the community wasn't who had killed her, but whether she had been executed for being a witch who had made a pact with the devil, or silenced because she knew too much about what had really happened to Henry and threatened to expose the men responsible for his disappearance. The most chilling aspect of Grandma Thorne's death was how quickly the community moved to erase all evidence of her existence. Her converted schoolhouse was burned to the ground within days, the ashes scattered and the foundation stones hauled away and dumped in the deepest part of the local creek. No one spoke her name aloud anymore, and when strangers asked about the cleared lot where her home had stood, locals would claim they had no memory of anyone ever living there. It was as if the entire community had entered into an unspoken conspiracy of silence, desperate to forget not just Grandma Thorne herself, but whatever terrible knowledge she had possessed about their neighbors and loved ones. Yet despite their efforts to erase her memory, Grandma Thorne's influence lingered like a poison in the mountain air. Strange accidents began plaguing the families of the men she had implicated in Henry's disappearance. Livestock would die mysteriously, crops would fail for no apparent reason, and children would wake screaming from nightmares they couldn't remember. Some claimed to see her ghostly figure wandering the forest at night, still carrying that blood-stained handkerchief, and searching for new souls to drag down to hell with her. Others insisted that her death had simply freed her spirit to work. Even greater evil, no longer constrained by the limitations of human flesh. The truth about what happened to Henry was never officially discovered, but the older residents of Clay County still speak in hushed tones about the night Grandma Thorne died, when several of the community's most respected men were seen walking home together in the early morning hours, their clothes muddy and their faces grim with the weight of shared secrets. Whether they had killed a witch to protect their community from supernatural evil, or murdered an old woman to prevent her from exposing their own earthly crimes, remains a mystery that has haunted Clay County for over a century. What makes Grandma Thorne's story particularly terrifying is how it blurs the line between supernatural horror and human evil, leaving us to wonder which is more frightening. The possibility that she really had made a pact with the devil and gained otherworldly powers, or the reality that she was simply a very clever and very dangerous woman who used fear and superstition to control her neighbors until they finally decided she knew too much to live. In the end, perhaps it doesn't matter whether the blood on that handkerchief came from hell or from something far more mundane and infinitely more disturbing. The knowledge that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary evil when they believe their secrets are threatened.
Story 4. The Queen Witch of Clemson.
In the shadow of Old Stone Church in Clemson, South Carolina, lies a grave that defies both nature and human understanding, where the earth itself seems to reject the evil buried beneath its surface. The weathered headstone bears the name Eliza Huger, but locals know her by a far more terrifying title, the Queen Witch of Clemson, a woman whose malevolence was so profound that even death couldn't contain her fury. What makes Eliza's final resting place truly horrifying isn't just the legend surrounding her life, but the undeniable physical evidence that something unnatural continues to emanate from her grave over a century after her burial. The most disturbing aspect of Eliza's grave is its complete sterility. No grass will grow on the dark soil above her remains, no flowers will bloom, and no weeds will take root, as if the earth itself recoils from whatever lies beneath. Even more unsettling, Every attempt to build a proper wall around her grave has ended in supernatural disaster. Lightning strikes have repeatedly shattered the brick and stone barriers, reducing them to rubble with an accuracy that defies meteorological explanation. The destruction always follows the same pattern: a single devastating bolt that seems to target the grave with surgical precision, leaving the surrounding area completely untouched while obliterating any structure meant to contain or honor Eliza's remains. The legend of how Eliza Huger became the Queen Witch reads like a Gothic nightmare rooted in the antebellum South's darkest traditions. Born into a wealthy Charleston family, she was married off to secure social connections, but her new life took a sinister turn when she became involved in the operation of a New Orleans brothel. The exact nature of her crimes remains shrouded in whispers and half-remembered stories, but the accounts speak of unspeakable acts committed against the women under her control, violations of both body and soul that went far beyond mere exploitation. Her methods were said to be so depraved that even the hardened criminals of New Orleans' underworld spoke her name in hushed, fearful tones. When Eliza's brothers discovered the full extent of her activities, their response was swift and brutal. According to local legend, they tracked her down with the methodical determination of men whose family honor had been irreparably stained by her actions. The confrontation that followed was violent and final. Eliza met her end at the hands of her own blood relatives, men who believed that death was the only way to stop the evil she had unleashed upon the world. But killing Eliza proved to be only the beginning of the horror, as her brothers soon discovered that some forms of evil are too powerful to be contained by mere mortality. The supernatural manifestations began almost immediately after Eliza's burial in the Old Stone Church Cemetery. The first lightning strike occurred during her funeral service, a bolt so powerful it cracked the church's foundation and sent mourners fleeing in terror. Over the decades that followed, every attempt to beautify or memorialize her gravesite has ended in destruction. Elaborate headstones have been reduced to powder. Decorative fences have been twisted into unrecognizable metal sculptures, and even simple flower arrangements have been found scattered and burned, as if touched by invisible flames. What makes Eliza's story particularly chilling is the pattern of misfortune that has befallen anyone who attempts to investigate or disturb her grave. Researchers who have tried to document the supernatural phenomena have reported equipment failures, unexplained injuries, and a sense of overwhelming dread that seems to emanate from the barren soil above her remains. Local groundskeepers refuse to work near the gravesite, claiming that the air around it feels thick and oppressive, filled with whispers in languages that predate human speech. Some have reported seeing a figure in antebellum dress standing beside the grave on stormy nights, her face twisted with rage and her hands reaching toward the sky as if commanding the lightning itself. The most terrifying aspect of the Queen Witch's legacy is the suggestion that her evil has not diminished with time, but has instead grown stronger and more focused. Recent lightning strikes have become more frequent and more precisely targeted, as if Eliza's spirit has learned to harness the electrical forces of nature with increasing skill. Meteorologists have been unable to explain why this particular grave site attracts lightning with such unusual frequency, especially during storms that barely register electrical activity in the surrounding area. The strikes always come without warning, often from clear skies, and always with enough force to completely destroy whatever human construction has dared to encroach upon her domain. Perhaps the most disturbing element of Eliza Huger's story is how it reflects the intersection of human evil and supernatural consequence. Her crimes in life were committed against the most vulnerable members of society, women trapped in circumstances that left them powerless to resist her cruelty. The fact that her malevolence has persisted beyond death suggests that some forms of evil are so profound they transcend the normal boundaries between the living and the dead. The lightning that repeatedly destroys her grave markers isn't just a supernatural phenomenon. It's a manifestation of rage so pure and concentrated that it can literally call down destruction from the heavens. Today, visitors to Old Stone Church can still see the evidence of Eliza's supernatural influence. The barren patch of earth where she lies buried stands out starkly against the lush grass of the surrounding cemetery, a permanent scar on the landscape that serves as a reminder of the evil that once walked among the living. Local residents still speak her name in whispers, and many refuse to visit the cemetery after dark, claiming that the Queen Witch's spirit grows stronger when the sun goes down. Whether Eliza Huger was truly a supernatural entity or simply a woman whose crimes were so heinous they left a permanent stain on the world itself, her grave remains a testament to the terrifying truth that some evils are too powerful to be contained by death, and that the earth itself will reject those who have committed acts too monstrous for forgiveness. The Queen Witch of Clemson serves as a chilling reminder that in the American South, where the line between history and legend often blurs beyond recognition, the most terrifying stories are often rooted in very real human evil that has somehow transcended the normal boundaries of mortality to continue its reign of terror from beyond the grave.
Story 5. The Phantom Hiker of Grandfather Mountain.
In the rugged wilderness of Grandfather Mountain, North Carolina, where ancient peaks pierce the sky like weathered tombstones and mist clings to the ridges like the breath of the dead, hikers have been encountering the same mysterious figure for over 70 years. He appears without warning on the most remote trails, always at dusk when the light begins to fade and shadows stretch long across the mountain paths. The man looks to be in his 60s, with a full beard gone gray and clothing that seems frozen in time, sturdy work pants, a heavy flannel shirt, and boots that have seen countless miles of mountain terrain. He carries a canvas pack that appears well used but never seems to weigh him down, and in his weathered hand he grips a walking stick carved from mountain laurel, its surface polished smooth by decades of use. What makes encounters with the Phantom Hiker so unsettling isn't his appearance, which seems perfectly normal for an experienced mountain man, but rather the way these meetings unfold with an almost scripted inevitability. Hikers report that he always appears when they're alone on the trail, emerging from the forest as if he's been walking parallel to their path for miles. He nods politely, offers a friendly greeting about the weather or the beauty of the mountains, and often shares what seems like genuine local knowledge about the trails, wildlife, and history of the area. His voice carries the distinctive accent of the North Carolina mountains, and his manner is so natural and reassuring that most people are genuinely glad for the company on what can be lonely and challenging hikes. The conversation that follows. These encounters always feels perfectly normal, even pleasant. The Phantom Hiker speaks knowledgeably about the mountain's ecology, pointing out rare plants or warning about dangerous sections of trail ahead. He might mention seeing bears in certain areas or recommend the best viewpoints for watching the sunset. Some hikers have walked with him for miles, sharing stories about their lives and listening to his tales of decades spent exploring these ancient peaks. His knowledge of the mountain seems encyclopedic, as if he's walked every trail and explored every hidden valley countless times over the years. But then, as the last light fades from the sky and true darkness begins to settle over the mountain, something impossible happens. The Phantom Hiker simply vanishes, not gradually, not by taking a different path or saying goodbye. He literally disappears into thin air, usually mid-sentence or while pointing out some feature of the landscape. One moment he's there, solid and real as any living person, and the next moment the hiker finds themselves completely alone on the trail, with no sound of footsteps departing and no sign that anyone else was ever there. The silence that follows these disappearances is profound and unsettling, broken only by the wind through the trees and the distant calls of night birds. The most disturbing aspect of these encounters is how normal they feel until the moment of vanishing. Unlike typical ghost stories where supernatural entities seem otherworldly or threatening, the Phantom Hiker appears completely human and genuinely helpful. Witnesses describe feeling no sense of fear or unease during their conversations with him. Quite the opposite, actually. His presence is comforting and reassuring, making solo hikers feel safer on dangerous mountain trails. It's only after he disappears that the full horror of the encounter sets in, as people realize they've been walking and talking with someone who couldn't possibly be alive. Research into the phantom hiker's identity has revealed tantalizing clues, but no definitive answers. Local historians have found records of several experienced mountain guides and naturalists who worked in the Grandfather Mountain area during the early to mid-1900s, men who fit the general description of the phantom figure. Some believe he might be the spirit of a particular guide who died in a climbing accident in the 1950s, a man known for his extensive knowledge of the mountain and his kindness to inexperienced hikers. Others suggest he could be a composite spirit, representing all the mountain men who lived and died on these peaks over the centuries. What makes the phantom hiker phenomenon particularly chilling is its consistency across decades of reported encounters. The descriptions of his appearance, manner, and behavior remain remarkably uniform, suggesting that witnesses are encountering the same entity rather than experiencing individual hallucinations or misidentifications. Park rangers and local guides have collected dozens of these reports over the years, and the details align so closely that they've begun to treat the phantom hiker as a genuine, if unexplained, feature of the mountain landscape. The psychological impact on witnesses is profound and lasting. Many people who encounter the phantom hiker report feeling fundamentally changed by the experience, not because it was frightening, but because it challenges their understanding of reality in such a gentle, almost kind way. Unlike encounters with malevolent spirits or threatening supernatural entities, meeting the phantom hiker leaves people with a sense of wonder mixed with deep unease. They've experienced something impossible, but it was presented in such a normal human way that it becomes difficult to dismiss or rationalize. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the phantom hiker legend is what it suggests about the nature of death and the afterlife. If this spirit truly exists, he seems to be continuing his life's work even after death, still helping and guiding hikers through the mountain wilderness he loved in life. This presents a terrifying possibility that death might not be the end of our earthly responsibilities, that some souls might be trapped in an eternal loop of their final purpose, forever walking the same trails and offering the same assistance to an endless stream of living visitors. The phantom hiker serves as a reminder that not all supernatural encounters are malevolent or threatening. Sometimes the most disturbing ghost stories are those that present the impossible as perfectly normal, forcing us to question the very nature of reality and death. In the mist-shrouded peaks of Grandfather Mountain, where the boundary between the living and the dead seems as thin as the mountain air itself, the phantom hiker continues his eternal journey, offering help to those who need it most, even though he himself can never reach his final destination. For hikers brave enough to venture onto Grandfather Mountain's remote trails at dusk, the possibility of encountering this benevolent spirit adds an extra layer of mystery to an already magical landscape. But those who do meet him are left with a haunting question that will follow them for the rest of their lives. If the dead can seem so alive, so helpful, and so human, how can we ever be certain who among us truly belongs to the world of the living?
Story 6. Priestfield, the most haunted land in Appalachia.
In the easternmost corner of West Virginia, where the mountain ridges roll toward the Virginia border like ancient sleeping giants, sits a 38-acre plot of land that has earned the terrifying distinction of being the most haunted place in all of Appalachia. Known as Priestfield, this seemingly innocent retreat center carries a legacy of supernatural terror that stretches back over 2 centuries, rooted in a mystery so profound that it continues to manifest in ways that defy rational explanation. The land was donated by Adam Livingston, a man whose name has become synonymous with one of America's most documented and disturbing cases of supernatural activity. And today, visitors can still see the monuments that mark both his grave and that of an unknown stranger, whose identity remains one of Appalachia's most chilling unsolved mysteries. The horror began in the late 1700s when Adam Livingston, a German immigrant farmer, made a decision that would curse his family and his land for generations to come. When a Catholic stranger arrived at his property seeking shelter and last rites as he lay dying, Livingston, a Protestant, refused to summon a Catholic priest and instead forced a Protestant minister to perform the final sacraments. The stranger died in spiritual agony, denied the religious comfort he desperately sought in his final moments, and was buried in an unmarked grave on Livingston's property. What followed was a supernatural nightmare so intense and well documented that it attracted the attention of religious authorities, government officials, and investigators from across the young nation. The manifestations began almost immediately, after the stranger's burial, starting with mysterious fires that would ignite spontaneously throughout Livingston's house and barn, always burning in perfect circles that consumed everything within their boundaries while leaving the surrounding areas completely untouched. Livestock began dying in ways that defied veterinary explanation. Horses would be found with their manes and tails sheared off in perfect geometric patterns. Cattle would develop mysterious wounds that formed religious symbols, and chickens would be discovered arranged in ritualistic formations that seemed to mock Christian iconography. The family's clothing would be found cut into intricate designs overnight, with scissors marks so precise they appeared to have been made by invisible hands guided by supernatural intelligence. But the physical manifestations were only the beginning of the Livingston family's torment. The entity that had taken residence on their land demonstrated an intelligence and malevolence that went far beyond simple poltergeist activity. It would engage in conversations with visitors, speaking in multiple languages including Latin, Greek, and tongues that scholars couldn't identify. The voice would emerge from empty air, sometimes seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously, and it displayed an intimate knowledge of people's private sins and secret shames that it would reveal with cruel precision during public gatherings. The entity seemed particularly focused on religious mockery, interrupting prayers with blasphemous commentary, and causing religious artifacts to behave in ways that horrified the devoutly Christian community. The supernatural activity escalated to such a degree that it attracted the attention of Father Dennis K. Hill, a Catholic priest who traveled from Baltimore to investigate the phenomena and attempt to bring peace to the tormented land. What Father Cahill witnessed during his stay at the Livingston property was so extraordinary that he documented it in detailed letters that survive to this day, providing some of the most credible eyewitness accounts of supernatural activity in American history. The priest described objects moving through the air with purposeful intelligence, disembodied voices that could predict future events with terrifying accuracy, and manifestations of religious imagery that appeared to be direct communications from the spirit world. Father Cahill's attempts to bless the land and provide spiritual relief to the Livingston family initially seemed to intensify the supernatural activity, as if the entity was fighting back against the religious intervention. However, after performing multiple blessing ceremonies and conducting what amounted to an extended exorcism of the entire property, the priest finally succeeded in bringing a measure of peace to the cursed land. The violent manifestations ceased, the mysterious fires stopped igniting, and the Livingston family was finally able to live without constant supernatural torment. In gratitude for Father Cahill's intervention, Adam Livingston converted to Catholicism and donated his entire 38-acre property to the Catholic Church, ensuring that the land would remain consecrated and protected from future supernatural incursions. Today, Priestfield operates as a retreat center, but the supernatural legacy of the land continues to manifest in ways that both fascinate and terrify visitors. The monuments to Adam Livingston and the unknown strangers serve as focal points for ongoing paranormal activity, with guests reporting a wide range of unexplained phenomena that seem to echo the original manifestations from over 2 centuries ago. One of the most frequently reported and disturbing occurrences involves visitors having the backs of their shirts mysteriously snipped while paying respects at the graves, with perfectly clean cuts appearing in fabric without any visible cause or explanation. The shirt-cutting phenomenon is particularly unsettling because it mirrors one of the original manifestations that plagued the Livingston family, suggesting that whatever entity once terrorized the property may still be present, albeit in a much more subdued form. Visitors describe feeling invisible hands touching their clothing, followed by the discovery of intricate cut patterns that appear to have been made with supernatural precision. The cuts are always made in the back of garments, in areas that would be impossible for the wearer to reach, and they often form patterns or symbols that seem to carry religious or mystical significance. What makes Priestfield's ongoing supernatural activity particularly chilling is how it demonstrates the persistence of spiritual energy across centuries. Despite Father Cahill's successful intervention and the consecration of the land, echoes of the original haunting continue to manifest, as if the traumatic events of the late 1700s have left a permanent imprint on the very fabric of reality in this location. The fact that these manifestations occur on consecrated ground that has been blessed by religious authorities makes them even more disturbing, suggesting that some forms of supernatural activity are so powerful they can persist even in the face of direct spiritual intervention. The unknown stranger's grave remains one of Appalachia's most haunting mysteries, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying supernatural phenomena arise from very human failures of compassion and understanding. Adam Livingston's refusal to honor a dying man's religious beliefs created a spiritual wound that took decades to heal and continues to influence the land to this day. The monuments at Priestfield serve as a testament to both the reality of supernatural phenomena and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their religious beliefs or cultural backgrounds. For visitors brave enough to spend time at Priestfield, the experience offers a unique opportunity to encounter supernatural phenomena in a controlled, consecrated environment where the activity, while still unsettling, lacks the malevolent intensity that once terrorized the Livingston family. However, the ongoing manifestations serve as a powerful reminder that some places hold memories so deep and traumatic that they transcend the normal boundaries between past and present, creating windows into supernatural realms that continue to influence our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. The legacy of Priestfield stands as perhaps the most well-documented case of supernatural activity in Appalachian history, a place where the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds remains permanently thin, offering both believers and skeptics the opportunity to confront the reality of phenomena that challenge our understanding of life, death, and the persistence of human consciousness beyond the grave.
Story 7. The Brown Mountain Lights. Spirits of the Lost.
Deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, where ancient peaks have stood sentinel for millions of years, and Cherokee legends speak of battles between the living and the dead, there exists a phenomenon so mysterious and terrifying that it has baffled scientists, investigators, and witnesses for over 250 years. The Brown Mountain Lights appear without warning in the darkness above Brown Mountain's ridge, glowing orbs of various colors that dance through the night sky with an intelligence and purpose that defies every attempt at rational explanation. What makes these lights truly horrifying isn't just their supernatural appearance, but the growing body of evidence suggesting they represent the restless spirits of those who died violently in these mountains, forever searching for something they can never find. The first documented sighting of the Brown Mountain Lights dates back to 1771, when German engineer John William Gerard de Bram recorded seeing mysterious illuminations while surveying the region for the colonial government. His official report described lights that appeared to rise from the mountain and hover in the air before moving in patterns that suggested conscious direction. What de Brom couldn't have known was that he was witnessing the beginning of one of America's most enduring supernatural mysteries, a phenomenon that would continue to manifest with increasing frequency and intensity for centuries to come, drawing investigators from around the world who would leave more puzzled than when they arrived. The Cherokee people, who had lived in these mountains for thousands of years before European settlement, possessed their own terrifying explanation for the lights that perfectly aligned with the violent history of the region. According to tribal legend, the lights were the spirits of Cherokee and Catawba women who had died during a massive battle between the two tribes, their souls condemned to wander the mountainside for eternity, searching with ghostly lanterns for the bodies of their fallen husbands, sons, and brothers. The Cherokee elders spoke of how the lights would appear most frequently during times of conflict and bloodshed, as if the violence of the living world somehow strengthened the connection between the realm of the dead and the mountain where so many had perished. What makes the Brown Mountain Lights particularly disturbing is their apparent intelligence and responsiveness to human presence. Witnesses consistently report that the lights seem to react to observers, moving closer when people call out to them, changing colors in response to flashlight signals, and sometimes appearing to follow vehicles along the mountain roads. The lights have been described as ranging in size from small firefly-like orbs to massive illuminations the size of automobiles, glowing in colors that span the entire spectrum from deep red to brilliant white, with some witnesses reporting colors that don't seem to exist in normal human perception. The scientific community's attempts to explain the Brown Mountain Lights have only deepened the mystery and added to the terror surrounding the phenomenon. In 1913, the U.S. Geological Survey conducted an extensive investigation, initially attributing the lights to locomotive headlights from the nearby railroad. However, this explanation was completely debunked when a massive flood destroyed all the railroad tracks and roads in the area, yet the lights continued to appear with the same frequency and intensity as before. Subsequent investigations by the Smithsonian Institution, the National Geographic Society, and numerous university research teams have failed to provide any satisfactory natural explanation for the phenomenon. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Brown Mountain Lights is how they seem to interact with the emotional and psychological state of witnesses. People who have lost loved ones in the mountains report that the lights appear to respond to their grief, moving in patterns that seem almost communicative, as if the spirits are trying to convey messages from beyond the grave. Some witnesses have described feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and loss when the lights appear, emotions so intense they seem to come from an external source rather than their own psyche. Others report hearing faint voices carried on the mountain wind, speaking in languages they don't recognize but somehow understand on a primal level. The lights have also been associated with a disturbing pattern of disappearances and unexplained deaths in the Brown Mountain area. Local search and rescue teams have documented numerous cases where hikers and campers have vanished without a trace after reporting sightings of the mysterious illuminations. In several instances, the missing persons were experienced outdoorsmen who knew the mountain terrain intimately, making their disappearances even more puzzling. When bodies are occasionally found, they're often discovered in locations that seem impossible to reach, positioned in ways that suggest they were placed there rather than having died from natural causes. Modern technology has only added to the mystery surrounding the Brown Mountain Lights rather than solving it. High-definition cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and infrared imaging equipment have captured the lights in stunning detail, revealing that they appear to generate their own electromagnetic signatures and emit radiation patterns that don't match any known natural phenomena. The lights seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, appearing solid and three-dimensional to the naked eye, while showing up as flat, two-dimensional objects on photographic equipment. Some investigators have reported that their electronic equipment malfunctions or shuts down completely when the lights approach, as if the phenomenon generates some form of electromagnetic interference that disrupts modern technology. The psychological impact on long-term witnesses of the Brown Mountain Lights is profound and often disturbing. People who live in the area and have observed the lights for years report developing an almost obsessive fascination with the phenomenon, spending countless nights watching the mountain ridge and waiting for the next appearance. Some describe feeling called to the mountain, experiencing vivid dreams about walking toward the lights, and joining the eternal search for something they can't identify. Local mental health professionals have documented cases of what they term light addiction, where individuals become so fixated on the phenomenon that they neglect their families, jobs, and personal well-being in pursuit of understanding the mystery. What makes the Brown Mountain Lights truly terrifying is the growing evidence that they represent not just a supernatural phenomenon, but a form of spiritual trap that has been operating for centuries. The Cherokee legends speak of the lights as a warning, a manifestation of souls who became lost between the world of the living and the world of the dead, unable to find peace because of the violent circumstances of their deaths. Modern witnesses who have attempted to follow or approach the lights often report experiencing disorientation, memory loss, and a sense of being pulled towards something they can't resist, suggesting that the phenomenon may actively seek to add new souls to its eternal congregation. The Brown Mountain Lights serve as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, and that the pursuit of supernatural phenomena can lead to consequences far more terrifying than the original mystery itself. In the ancient peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the boundary between the living and the dead has been worn thin by centuries of violence and tragedy, the lights continue their eternal dance, searching for something that may never be found, and calling to the living with a song that promises answers, but delivers only deeper questions and darker truths about the nature of death, loss, and the terrible persistence of human consciousness beyond the grave. For those brave enough to venture into the Brown Mountain area after dark, the possibility of witnessing these supernatural lights offers both the thrill of encountering the unknown and the very real risk of becoming part of the mystery themselves, forever adding their own light to the ghostly procession that haunts these ancient mountains.
Story 8. The Mothman's Warning.
In the autumn of 1966, the small industrial town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, became the epicenter of one of America's most terrifying and well-documented encounters with the supernatural, when residents began reporting sightings of a creature so horrifying that it would forever change their understanding of what lurks in the darkness beyond human comprehension. The entity that came to be known as the Mothman was unlike anything in recorded folklore or cryptozoology. A massive humanoid figure standing nearly 10 feet tall with enormous wings that spanned 15 feet from tip to tip, covered in dark, gray fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But the most terrifying aspect of this creature wasn't its imposing size or otherworldly appearance. It was the pair of hypnotic red eyes, each the size of dinner plates, that glowed with an intelligence so alien and malevolent that witnesses would wake screaming from nightmares for years after their encounters. The first documented sighting occurred on November 12, 1966, when two young couples were driving near the abandoned West Virginia Ordnance Works, a former World War II munitions plant that had been left to decay in the wilderness outside Point Pleasant. As they passed the crumbling concrete structures, their headlights illuminated something that defied rational explanation. A massive winged creature perched atop one of the abandoned buildings, its enormous red eyes fixed on their vehicle with an intensity that seemed to pierce through metal and glass directly into their souls. When the creature spread its wings and took flight, the couples fled in terror, but what happened next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Despite driving at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour on winding mountain roads, the Mothman effortlessly kept pace with their car, gliding silently overhead without any apparent effort or wing movement. What made the Mothman encounters particularly disturbing was the creature's apparent ability to predict and herald disaster. In the 13 months following the first sighting, Point Pleasant and the surrounding area experienced an unprecedented wave of tragic events, accidents, and unexplained phenomena that seemed to correlate directly with Mothman appearances. Witnesses reported seeing the creature before house fires, car accidents, industrial mishaps, and personal tragedies, as if it was drawn to impending doom or somehow caused these disasters through its mere presence. The pattern became so consistent that some residents began to view Mothman sightings as death omens, warning their neighbors to be extra cautious whenever the creature was spotted in the area. The psychological impact on the Point Pleasant community was profound and lasting. People who had never believed in the supernatural found themselves scanning the skies at night, afraid to venture out after dark, and jumping at every shadow or unusual sound. Children refused to play outside. Businesses saw decreased foot traffic during evening hours, and the town's social fabric began to unravel as neighbors turned against each other, some believing the sightings were real, while others dismissed them as mass hysteria. The stress of living under the constant threat of encountering this otherworldly predator took a severe toll on the mental health of residents, with local doctors reporting a significant increase in anxiety disorders, insomnia, and stress-related illnesses. The Mothman's behavior suggested an intelligence that was both alien and deeply unsettling. Unlike typical cryptid sightings where creatures flee from human contact, the Mothman seemed to actively seek out encounters with people, often appearing in populated areas and making no attempt to hide its presence. Witnesses described feeling as though the creature was studying them, analyzing their behavior and reactions with those enormous red eyes that seemed to see not just their physical forms, but their deepest fears and secrets. Some reported experiencing telepathic communication during their encounters, receiving wordless messages that filled them with dread and a sense of impending catastrophe that they couldn't shake for weeks afterward. The most terrifying aspect of the Mothman phenomenon was how it seemed to feed on human fear and suffering. The creature's appearances became more frequent and brazen as the community's terror intensified, as if it drew strength from the psychological chaos it had created. Witnesses noticed that the Mothman's eyes seemed to glow brighter during moments of peak fear, and several people reported that the creature appeared to smile, an expression that should have been impossible given its described anatomy, but was nonetheless perceived by multiple independent witnesses. This suggested that the entity wasn't just a mindless beast, but a malevolent intelligence that took pleasure in tormenting the human population. The climax of the Mothman terror came on December 15, 1967, when the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio collapsed during rush-hour traffic, killing 46 people in one of the deadliest bridge disasters in American history. In the hours leading up to the collapse, multiple witnesses reported seeing the Mothman perched on the bridge's towers, its red eyes glowing more intensely than ever before. Some survivors of the disaster claimed they saw the creature's massive form silhouetted against the sky as the bridge fell, as if it was overseeing the catastrophe it had somehow orchestrated. The timing of this ultimate disaster, coming at the end of 13 months of Mothman sightings, seemed too coincidental to dismiss as mere chance. What makes the Mothman encounters particularly chilling is the quality and credibility of the witnesses involved. Unlike many cryptid sightings that come from unreliable sources, the Mothman was observed by police officers, firefighters, construction workers, business owners, and other respected members of the community whose reputations and livelihoods depended on their credibility. These weren't people seeking attention or prone to flights of fancy. They were ordinary citizens who found themselves face to face with something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural world. The consistency of their descriptions, despite being given independently and often under great emotional distress, lends a terrifying authenticity to the phenomenon. The aftermath of the Silver Bridge collapse marked the end of the intense Mothman activity in Point Pleasant, but the creature's legacy of terror continues to influence the community to this day. Many residents believed that the Mothman was some form of harbinger or supernatural warning system, appearing to alert people to impending disasters, even though its warnings were too cryptic to be understood until after the tragedies had occurred. Others theorized that the creature was somehow responsible for causing the disasters, using its otherworldly powers to manipulate events and create the suffering it seemed to crave. The Mothman phenomenon raises disturbing questions about the nature of prophecy, fate, and the possibility that some entities exist specifically to herald or cause human suffering. If the creature truly could predict disasters, why didn't it provide clear warnings that could have saved lives? If it was responsible for causing the tragedies, what did it gain from the death and destruction it orchestrated? The fact that the Mothman disappeared after the Silver Bridge collapse suggests that it had accomplished whatever dark purpose brought it to Point Pleasant, leaving behind a traumatized community and a mystery that continues to defy explanation. 4. The survivors of the Mothman encounters. The experience fundamentally changed their understanding of reality and their place in the universe. They had witnessed something that shouldn't exist, something that operated according to rules that defied human comprehension, and the knowledge that such entities could appear anywhere, at any time, continues to haunt them decades later. The Mothman serves as a terrifying reminder that there are forces in the world that exist beyond human understanding or control, entities that may view human suffering not as a tragedy to be prevented, but as entertainment to be savored, and that our modern, rational world may be far more fragile and vulnerable than we dare to imagine. The red eyes of the Mothman, glowing with alien intelligence and malevolent purpose, remain one of the most haunting images in American supernatural folklore, a symbol of the unknown terrors that may be watching us from the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves and remind us that we are not the apex predators we believe ourselves to be.
Story 9. The Moon-Eyed People, the Lost Race.
In the deepest, most isolated valleys of the Appalachian Mountains, where Cherokee legends speak of ancient mysteries that predate recorded history, there once lived a race of beings so strange and terrifying that their very existence challenges everything we think we know about human evolution and the early inhabitants of North America. The Cherokee called them the Moon-Eyed People, and according to tribal cosmology that has been passed down through countless generations, these creatures were not quite human despite their humanoid appearance. They were described as small in stature, with pale white skin that seemed to glow in the darkness, and most disturbing of all, enormous blue eyes that were so large and luminous they appeared to take up half of their faces, giving them an otherworldly appearance that struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest Cherokee warriors. What made the Moon-Eyed People truly terrifying wasn't just their alien appearance, but their complete inability to tolerate sunlight, which forced them to live entirely nocturnal lives in the deepest caves and most shadowed valleys of the mountains. According to Cherokee oral tradition, these beings would emerge only under the cover of darkness, moving through the forest with an eerie silence that seemed supernatural, their massive eyes reflecting moonlight like the eyes of nocturnal predators. The Cherokee described them as having an almost ghostly quality, appearing and disappearing so quickly and quietly that encounters with them felt more like hallucinations than real experiences, leaving witnesses to question their own sanity and wonder if they had truly seen these pale, large-eyed creatures or simply imagined them in the shifting shadows of the mountain night. The Cherokee legends describe a long and bitter conflict between their ancestors and the Moon-Eyed People, a war that lasted for generations and was fought not just over territory, but over fundamentally different ways of existing in the world. The Moon-Eyed People were said to possess knowledge and abilities that seemed almost magical to the Cherokee, including the power to move through the mountains without leaving tracks, to appear and vanish at will, and to communicate with each other across vast distances without making any sound that human ears could detect. They were master builders who constructed elaborate underground cities and tunnel systems that honeycomb the Appalachian Mountains to this day, creating a hidden civilization that existed parallel to, but separate from the human world above ground. What makes the Moon-Eyed People legend particularly chilling is how it describes their ultimate fate and the implications for what might still be lurking in the unexplored depths of the Appalachian cave systems. According to Cherokee tradition, their ancestors eventually drove the Moon-Eyed People deeper and deeper into the mountains, forcing them to retreat into the most inaccessible caves and underground chambers where sunlight could never reach them. The final battle was said to have taken place during a solar eclipse, when the Moon-Eyed People emerged en masse, believing that the darkened sky would allow them to fight during what appeared to be their preferred conditions. However, when the eclipse ended and normal daylight returned, the Moon-Eyed People were caught in the open and suffered a devastating defeat that scattered the survivors to the deepest parts of the underground world. The most disturbing aspect of the Moon-Eyed People legend is the suggestion that they didn't simply disappear or die out, but instead retreated so far underground that they became completely separated from the surface world, evolving in isolation for thousands of years into something even more alien and terrifying than their ancestors. Cherokee elders speak of deep caves where strange sounds can be heard echoing from chambers that no human has ever explored, sounds that don't match any known animal or natural phenomenon. They describe finding evidence of recent habitation in cave systems that should be uninhabitable, carefully arranged stones, primitive tools made from materials that don't exist on the surface, and most unsettling of all, carvings and symbols that seem to depict the gradual transformation of humanoid figures into something increasingly monstrous and inhuman. Modern cave explorers and speleologists have reported encounters that seem to validate the most terrifying aspects of the Cherokee legends. Deep in the Appalachian cave systems, in chambers that require technical climbing equipment and days of underground travel to reach, explorers have found evidence of habitation that defies explanation. They describe discovering areas where the cave walls have been smoothed and shaped by tools, creating living spaces that show signs of recent use, despite being located miles underground in areas that should be completely inaccessible to surface dwellers. Most disturbing are the reports of finding primitive furniture, sleeping areas, and food storage systems that suggest an ongoing civilization existing in the deepest parts of the mountain cave networks. The psychological impact on cave explorers who venture into the deepest parts of the Appalachian underground is profound and often permanent. Many report experiencing an overwhelming sense of being watched while in the deepest chambers, a feeling so intense that it drives them to abandon their explorations and flee back to the surface. Others describe hearing sounds that seem to come from even deeper parts of the cave system, rhythmic tapping, whispered conversations in unknown languages, and most terrifying of all, what sounds like large groups of beings moving through chambers that maps suggest should be solid rock. Some explorers have reported seeing brief glimpses of pale figures with enormous eyes moving through the darkness at the very edge of their headlamp beams, figures that vanish so quickly that witnesses are left questioning whether they saw anything at all. What makes the Moon-Eyed People phenomenon particularly terrifying is how it suggests that human evolution may have taken multiple paths in the isolated environment of the Appalachian Mountains, creating subspecies or entirely separate species that developed in parallel to mainstream humanity. The description of beings with enlarged eyes adapted for life in complete darkness, pale skin that never sees sunlight, and the ability to survive in underground environments that would kill normal humans suggests evolutionary adaptations that could only develop over thousands of years of isolation. This raises the horrifying possibility that there may be entire civilizations of these adapted beings living in the vast, unexplored cave systems that run throughout the Appalachian Mountains, civilizations that have been watching and studying surface humanity for millennia while remaining completely hidden from our awareness. The most chilling aspect of the Moon-Eyed People legend is what it implies about the true nature of the Appalachian Mountains and the secrets they may be hiding in their deepest, most inaccessible places. If the Cherokee legends are based on real encounters with a separate branch of human evolution, then the mountains may be home to beings whose intelligence, abilities, and motivations are completely alien to surface humanity. The fact that these beings were described as having superior knowledge and almost supernatural abilities suggests that thousands of years of underground evolution may have produced a species that is not just physically different from surface humans, but intellectually and perhaps even psychically advanced beyond our comprehension. For modern explorers and researchers brave enough to venture into the deepest parts of the Appalachian cave systems, the possibility of encountering descendants of the moon-eyed people represents both the ultimate discovery and the ultimate terror. The idea that there may be entire cities of pale, large-eyed beings living in the darkness beneath our feet, watching our surface civilization with those enormous, luminous eyes, and perhaps planning their eventual return to the world above, is a nightmare that challenges our most basic assumptions about human history, evolution, and our place as the dominant species on this planet. In the endless darkness of the deepest caves, where human technology fails and our senses become unreliable, the moon-eyed people may still be waiting, their massive eyes reflecting the faint light of our headlamps as they decide whether surface humanity is ready to learn that we are not alone, and that we may never have been the only intelligent species calling the Appalachian Mountains home.
Story 10. The Whistling in the Woods.
Deep in the hollers of Appalachia, where the mountains seem to swallow sound and the trees grow so thick that daylight barely penetrates the canopy even at noon, there exists a phenomenon so universally feared that it has spawned one of the region's most important survival rules. If you hear whistling in the woods at night, pretend you're already asleep. This isn't folklore or superstition passed down through generations of storytellers. This is practical advice that has saved countless lives in a region where the line between the natural and supernatural has been blurred beyond recognition. The whistling that echoes through these ancient forests carries with it a malevolence so pure and concentrated that even hardened mountain folk, people who have faced bears, wildcats, and human predators without flinching, will abandon their campsites and flee to the safety of their homes rather than risk discovering what creates those haunting melodies in the darkness. The whistling phenomenon manifests in several distinct forms, each more terrifying than the last, and experienced mountain dwellers have learned to distinguish between them based on subtle differences in tone, rhythm, and the emotional response they trigger in listeners. The most common type is a simple, repetitive melody that seems to come from no particular direction, drifting through the trees like smoke, and creating an overwhelming sense of unease in anyone who hears it. This whistling has a hypnotic quality that draws listeners toward its source, compelling them to leave the safety of their shelters and venture into the dark forest despite every instinct screaming at them to stay put. Those who have resisted the urge to investigate describe feeling as though invisible hands were pulling them forward, and many report that the whistling seemed to grow louder and more insistent the harder they fought against its influence. More disturbing are the accounts of whistling that seems to respond to human presence, changing its pattern and intensity based on the reactions of its audience. Campers have reported hearing simple melodies that gradually become more complex and beautiful as the night progresses, as if whatever is creating the sound is learning and adapting its technique to better entice listeners. Some witnesses describe hearing their own favorite songs whistled back to them with perfect accuracy, despite never having hummed or sung those melodies aloud during their time in the mountains. This suggests that whatever entity is responsible for the whistling possesses the ability to read human thoughts or memories, using personal musical preferences as psychological weapons to break down resistance and lure victims into the darkness. The most terrifying form of the phenomenon involves whistling that seems to come from multiple sources simultaneously, creating complex harmonies that no single human throat could produce. Witnesses describe hearing what sounds like entire choirs of invisible beings scattered throughout the forest, all whistling in perfect coordination to create melodies so beautiful and otherworldly that listeners become completely entranced, losing all sense of time and place. These group whistling events often last for hours, with the melodies growing progressively more complex and emotionally manipulative, cycling through themes of longing, sadness, joy, and terror in ways that seem designed to overwhelm the human psyche and break down all psychological defenses. What makes the whistling phenomenon particularly insidious is how it exploits fundamental human psychology and our evolutionary responses to music and sound. Whistling is typically associated with happiness, contentment, and human companionship. It's a sound that should comfort us and suggest the presence of other people in an otherwise isolated environment. The entities responsible for the Appalachians whistling seem to understand this psychological association and use it as a weapon, creating sounds that trigger our social instincts and desire for human contact while leading us towards something that is decidedly inhuman and malevolent. This perversion of a normally comforting human behavior makes the phenomenon even more disturbing, as it turns one of our most basic social signals into a predatory lure. Local investigations into the whistling phenomenon have revealed some disturbing truths about its origins, though these discoveries have only deepened the mystery rather than solving it. In some cases, the whistling has been traced to human sources, specifically moonshiners and other illegal operators who use a technique involving strings stretched between trees and small buckets or cans that create eerie whistling sounds when the wind passes through them. These mountain violins are deliberately designed to keep curious children and unwanted visitors away from hidden stills and illegal activities, using the region's supernatural folklore as a cover for very human, criminal enterprises. However, this explanation accounts for only a small percentage of whistling incidents, and the mechanical sounds produced by these devices lack the complexity, responsiveness, and psychological impact of the truly supernatural whistling that terrorizes the mountains. The most chilling aspect of the whistling phenomenon is the pattern of disappearances associated with it. Search and rescue teams throughout Appalachia have documented numerous cases where experienced hikers, hunters, and campers have vanished after reporting hearing mysterious whistling in the woods. In many instances, the missing persons were found days or weeks later in locations that made no logical sense. Experienced outdoorsmen discovered miles off established trails in areas they had no reason to visit, often in states of confusion or amnesia, with no memory of how they had arrived at their final locations. Some were found in impossible places, such as high on cliff faces or in deep caves that would require specialized equipment to access, suggesting that whatever lured them away possessed abilities far beyond normal human capabilities. Even more disturbing are the cases where missing persons are never found at all, leaving behind only their abandoned campsites and the testimonies of companions who heard the whistling but were wise enough not to investigate. These disappearances follow a consistent pattern. The victim hears the whistling, becomes increasingly agitated and fixated on finding its source, and eventually abandons all reason and safety to pursue the sound into the darkness. Companions who try to restrain or reason with affected individuals often describe them as being in a trance-like state, completely unresponsive to pleas or physical attempts to hold them back, as if they were being controlled by an external force that had completely overridden their free will. The psychological profiles of whistling victims reveal another disturbing pattern that suggests the phenomenon specifically targets certain types of individuals. Those most susceptible to the whistling's influence tend to be people who are emotionally vulnerable, isolated, or dealing with significant personal trauma or loss. The entities responsible for the whistling seem to possess an uncanny ability to identify and exploit psychological weaknesses, using the hypnotic melodies to amplify feelings of loneliness, depression, or desperation until victims become completely susceptible to manipulation. This targeting of the emotionally wounded adds a particularly cruel dimension to the phenomenon, as it preys upon people who are already suffering and uses their pain as a gateway to complete psychological domination. Modern technology has provided some insights into the whistling phenomenon, but these discoveries have only made it more frightening rather than less mysterious. Audio recording equipment has captured whistling sounds that display acoustic properties that should be impossible in natural environments, melodies that seem to come from multiple directions simultaneously, sounds that register on recording, devices but create different effects when played back to human listeners, and frequencies that exist outside the normal range of human hearing but still somehow affect people's behavior and emotional states. Some recordings have revealed subsonic elements embedded within the whistling that may explain its hypnotic effects, suggesting that whatever creates these sounds understands acoustic manipulation at a level that surpasses human scientific knowledge. The survival wisdom passed down through generations of Appalachian families regarding the whistling phenomenon reflects a deep understanding of its dangers and the futility of trying to confront or investigate it directly. The advice to pretend you're already asleep when hearing whistling in the woods isn't just about avoiding the sound, it's about presenting yourself as an uninteresting target, someone who is unconscious and therefore not susceptible to the psychological manipulation that the whistling employs. This strategy acknowledges that the phenomenon is intelligent and selective in its targeting, choosing victims who show signs of awareness, curiosity, or emotional vulnerability, while potentially ignoring those who appear to be in states where they cannot be easily influenced or controlled. The whistling in the Appalachian woods serves as a terrifying reminder that some of the most dangerous predators are those that use our own psychology and social instincts against us. In a region where human survival has always depended on community, cooperation, and the comfort of familiar sounds and voices, the entities responsible for the whistling have weaponized these very traits, turning our need for human contact into a deadly trap. For those brave enough to venture into the deep woods of Appalachia, the sound of whistling in the darkness represents not the promise of human companionship, but the call of something ancient, intelligent, and utterly inhuman that understands exactly how to exploit our deepest psychological needs to lure us away from safety and into a fate that may be worse than death itself. The fact that this phenomenon continues to claim victims in the modern era, despite widespread knowledge of its dangers and the survival strategies developed to avoid it, speaks to the sophisticated and evolving nature of whatever intelligence is responsible for the whistling. It suggests that we are dealing with entities that learn from their encounters with humans, adapting their techniques and strategies to remain effective even as their potential victims become more educated about the dangers they represent.
Story 11. The Trail Camera Entities.
In the remote wilderness areas of Appalachia, where modern technology meets ancient mysteries, hunters and wildlife researchers have begun capturing images that defy explanation and challenge our understanding of what creatures inhabit the deepest, most inaccessible parts of these ancient mountains. Trail cameras, those motion-activated devices designed to photograph deer, bears, and other common wildlife, have instead been recording encounters with entities so bizarre and terrifying that many researchers refuse to publish their findings, fearing ridicule from the scientific community or worse, attracting the attention of whatever these creatures might be. The images show beings that appear to be neither fully animal nor recognizably human, possessing anatomical features that seem to violate the basic principles of biology and evolution, yet moving through the forest with a purpose and intelligence that suggests they are far more than mere animals. The most disturbing trail camera footage shows creatures that witnesses have dubbed the spiny ones, bipedal entities covered in what appears to be a combination of coarse fur and sharp, needle-like protrusions that extend from their backs, arms, and heads like the quills of some nightmarish porcupine. These beings stand approximately 7 to 8 feet tall when fully upright, but they seem capable of contorting their bodies in ways that allow them to move on all fours or even flatten themselves against trees and rock faces with inflexibility that appears to defy skeletal structure. Their faces, when visible in the grainy infrared footage, show features that are disturbingly human-like, yet wrong in ways that trigger an immediate revulsion response in viewers. Eyes that are too large and positioned incorrectly, mouths that seem to extend too far back along the skull, and expressions that suggest an intelligence that is both alien and malevolent. What makes the trail camera evidence particularly chilling is the behavior these entities display when they encounter the cameras themselves. Unlike normal wildlife, which either ignores trail cameras or shows brief curiosity before moving on, the spiny ones seem to understand exactly what these devices are and demonstrate a sophisticated awareness of being recorded. Multiple cameras have captured footage of these creatures approaching the devices with obvious intent, examining them with what appears to be scientific curiosity, and in some cases, deliberately positioning themselves to be photographed as if they want their images to be discovered by humans. This behavior suggests not only intelligence, but a desire to communicate or perhaps intimidate, indicating that these entities may be as interested in studying human technology as researchers are in documenting their existence. The geographical distribution of trail camera encounters with these entities follows a disturbing pattern that suggests they may be more numerous and widespread than initially believed. Sightings have been reported across multiple states throughout the Appalachian Range, from the mountains of Georgia and Tennessee to the remote wilderness areas of West Virginia and Pennsylvania, indicating that these creatures either have an extensive territory or represent multiple populations of the same species. The consistency of their appearance and behavior across such a wide geographical area suggests that they are not isolated anomalies, but rather an established species that has somehow managed to remain hidden from mainstream scientific discovery. Despite their apparent abundance and bold behavior around human technology, the psychological impact on researchers and hunters who have encountered evidence of the spiny ones is profound and often life-changing. Many report developing an overwhelming sense of being watched whenever they enter the deep woods, a paranoia so intense that it forces them to abandon research projects or hunting expeditions they have pursued for decades. The knowledge that something intelligent and potentially hostile is observing human activities in areas previously considered safe wilderness creates a level of anxiety that goes far beyond normal concerns about bears, wildcats, or other known predators. Some researchers have reported that after viewing trail camera footage of these entities, they can no longer enjoy solitary time in nature, constantly scanning the tree line for signs of movement and jumping at every unusual sound or shadow. The most terrifying aspect of the trail camera evidence is what it reveals about the entity's apparent interest in human technology and behavior. Several cameras have captured footage of the spiny ones manipulating or examining human-made objects they encounter in the forest, camping equipment, hunting stands, trail markers, and even abandoned vehicles. Their interactions with these objects show a level of understanding and curiosity that suggests they are actively studying human technology and possibly learning from it. Some footage shows the creatures using tools in sophisticated ways, fashioning implements from natural materials, or modifying human-made objects for purposes that researchers can only guess at, indicating a level of intelligence that may rival or exceed human capabilities. Even more disturbing are the trail camera images that seem to show the spiny ones engaged in what can only be described as ritualistic behavior. Multiple cameras have recorded footage of these entities gathering in groups, arranging natural objects in complex patterns, and performing coordinated movements that appear to have ceremonial or communicative significance. These gatherings often take place in locations that have special significance in local folklore, ancient burial grounds, sites of historical tragedies, or areas where other supernatural phenomena have been reported. The fact that these creatures seem drawn to places with dark histories suggests they may be connected to or influenced by the spiritual energy that permeates certain locations throughout Appalachia. The response of local wildlife to the presence of the spiny ones provides additional evidence of their unnatural nature, and the threat they may pose to the ecosystem. Trail cameras positioned in areas where these entities have been sighted often show a complete absence of normal wildlife activity, as if deer, bears, and other animals instinctively avoid areas where the creatures are present. When normal wildlife does appear in footage from these locations, the animals often display signs of extreme agitation and fear, behavior that suggests they recognize the spiny ones as predators or threats in ways that go beyond normal predator-prey relationships. Some footage shows animals fleeing in apparent terror from areas where no visible threat is present, suggesting that the entities may possess sensory capabilities or emit signals that affect wildlife in ways humans cannot detect. The technological implications of the trail camera evidence are as disturbing as the biological ones. Several researchers have reported that cameras positioned in areas with high spiny one activity experience unusual malfunctions, batteries draining at accelerated rates, memory cards becoming corrupted, and electronic components failing in ways that suggest exposure to electromagnetic interference or other unknown energy sources. Some cameras have been found physically damaged in ways that appear deliberate rather than accidental, with specific components removed or destroyed while leaving other parts of the device intact. This selective damage suggests that the entities understand the function of different camera components and may be attempting to limit or control what evidence of their activities reaches human researchers. Perhaps the most chilling discovery in the trail camera evidence is footage that appears to show the spiny ones watching human researchers from concealment, observing the placement and maintenance of the cameras themselves. This surveillance behavior indicates that the entities are not only aware of being studied, but are actively counter-studying their human observers, learning about research methods, technology, and possibly individual researchers' habits and schedules. The implications of being observed by intelligent entities whose motivations and capabilities remain completely unknown creates a level of vulnerability that many researchers find psychologically unbearable, leading to the abandonment of long-term studies and the suppression of evidence that could be crucial to understanding these creatures. The trail camera phenomenon represents a new frontier in cryptozoological research, where modern technology has finally provided clear evidence of entities that have likely existed in the Appalachian wilderness for centuries, but remained hidden from human observation until now. However, the evidence raises more questions than it answers, and the behavior of the spiny ones suggests that they may be as interested in studying humans as we are in documenting them. The possibility that we are engaged in a mutual observation relationship with intelligent entities whose agenda and capabilities remain completely unknown represents a paradigm shift in how we understand our relationship with the natural world and our position as the dominant species on this planet. 4. Researchers brave enough to continue studying the trail camera evidence, despite its disturbing implications. Each new image and video clip provides both valuable scientific data and a reminder that the deep wilderness of Appalachia may be home to forms of intelligence that challenge our most basic assumptions about biology, evolution, and the nature of consciousness itself. The spiny ones, captured in grainy infrared footage and blurry photographs, represent not just an unknown species, but a potential threat to human understanding of our place in the natural order, entities that may be far more advanced and dangerous than their primitive appearance suggests.
Story 12. The Calling Voices.
In the deepest, most isolated regions of Appalachia, where cell phone signals die and GPS devices spin helplessly in circles, there exists a phenomenon so terrifying that it has become the foundation of the most important survival rule passed down through generations of mountain families. If you hear your name called in the woods, know you didn't. This isn't metaphorical advice or folklore designed to teach children caution. This is literal, life-saving instruction based on centuries of documented encounters with something that understands human psychology so intimately that it can weaponize our most basic social instincts against us. The voices that call from the darkness of the Appalachian wilderness don't just know your name. They know exactly how to say it in ways that will compel you to abandon all reason and follow them into places from which very few people ever return. The phenomenon manifests in several distinct forms, each more psychologically sophisticated than the last, suggesting that whatever intelligence is responsible for these calls has been studying human behavior for far longer than recorded history. The most common type involves hearing your name called in the voice of someone you love and trust, a parent, spouse, child, or close friend, spoken with such perfect accuracy that even people who understand the danger find themselves taking several steps toward the sound before their rational mind reasserts control. These calls typically come from deep within the forest, just far enough away that the listener can't quite see who is calling, but close enough that the voice seems genuine and urgent, creating a psychological trap that exploits our deepest emotional bonds and our instinctive need to help those we care about. More disturbing are the accounts of voices that seem to know intimate details about the listener's life, calling out not just names but personal information that should be impossible for any stranger to possess. Hikers have reported hearing their own voices calling back to them from the darkness, speaking their full names, addresses, and even recounting recent conversations or private thoughts with an accuracy that suggests supernatural surveillance or mind-reading capabilities. These encounters often involve the voice providing information that proves it knows about the listener's family members, work colleagues, and personal relationships, creating a sense of violation and vulnerability that goes far beyond simple fear and enters the realm of psychological terror. The most terrifying form of the calling phenomenon involves what witnesses describe as layered voices, multiple entities calling the same name simultaneously, but with slight variations in timing, tone, and emotional content. These coordinated calls create an overwhelming auditory experience that seems designed to completely overwhelm the listener's psychological defenses, with some voices sounding desperate and pleading, while others carry undertones of threat or malice. Witnesses describe feeling as though they are being pulled in multiple directions simultaneously, with different aspects of their personality responding to different vocal approaches, creating an internal conflict so intense that many people report feeling as though they were being torn apart psychologically. What makes the calling voices particularly insidious is how they exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities and emotional states. People who are grieving the loss of loved ones report hearing the voices of the deceased calling to them with such emotional authenticity that the experience feels like a genuine supernatural reunion rather than a predatory lure. Parents who have lost children describe hearing their sons or daughters calling for help with such desperation and realism that resisting the urge to respond requires almost superhuman willpower. The entities responsible for these calls seem to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of human loss and trauma, using our deepest wounds as weapons to break down our psychological defenses and compel us to follow them into the darkness. The geographical pattern of calling voice encounters reveals a disturbing intelligence behind the phenomenon that suggests these entities are not randomly distributed throughout the mountains, but are strategically positioned in locations where they can maximize their psychological impact. The calls most frequently occur in areas where people are already emotionally vulnerable, near sites of historical tragedies, locations where accidents or disappearances have occurred, and places that hold personal significance for the listeners. This targeting suggests that the entities responsible for the voices are capable of accessing not just personal information about individuals, but also understanding the emotional significance of specific locations and timing their encounters to exploit maximum psychological vulnerability. Local search and rescue teams have documented a disturbing pattern of disappearances that correlate directly with reports of calling voices, creating a body of evidence that transforms this phenomenon from folklore into a genuine public safety crisis. The missing persons cases follow a consistent pattern. Experienced outdoorsmen venture into the deep woods alone, report hearing voices calling their names, and are never seen again despite extensive search efforts involving professional rescue teams, tracking dogs, and helicopter surveillance. When bodies are occasionally recovered, they are often found in locations that make no logical sense. Experienced hikers discovered miles off any established trail in terrain so difficult that reaching these locations would require specialized equipment and expertise that the victims didn't possess. Even more disturbing are the rare cases where missing persons are found alive, but in states of complete psychological breakdown, with no memory of how they reached their final locations, or what happened to them during the time they were missing. These survivors often display signs of severe trauma and speak in fragmented, terrified whispers about following voices through landscapes that seem to shift and change around them, leading them through forests that didn't follow normal geographical rules and into places that seem to exist outside of normal reality. Their accounts describe being led through areas where the laws of physics appeared to be suspended, where distances stretched impossibly and familiar landmarks disappeared and reappeared in different locations, suggesting that the entities responsible for the voices possess the ability to manipulate not just human psychology, but the very fabric of reality itself. The technological investigation of the calling voice phenomenon has yielded results that are as disturbing as they are scientifically impossible. Audio recording equipment positioned in areas with high voice activity has captured calls that display acoustic properties that shouldn't exist in natural environments. Voices that seem to come from multiple directions simultaneously. Sounds that register differently on recording devices than they do to human ears. And vocalizations that contain subsonic and ultrasonic elements that may explain their powerful psychological effects. Some recordings have captured voices speaking in languages that linguists cannot identify. Yet listeners report understanding the meaning of these unknown words on an emotional level that bypasses rational comprehension. The psychological profiles of people who have successfully resisted the calling voices reveal important insights into the nature of the phenomenon and potential defense strategies. Those who manage to ignore the calls and return safely tend to be individuals with strong emotional support systems, clear understanding of the danger, and most importantly, the ability to recognize that their emotional responses are being artificially manipulated by an external intelligence. The survival strategy of responding to calls with "no, you didn't" isn't just about denial. It's about actively rejecting the psychological manipulation and refusing to engage with entities that are using intimate knowledge of human psychology as a weapon. The calling voices represent perhaps the most sophisticated form of psychological predation documented in the Appalachian Mountains, demonstrating an understanding of human nature that suggests these entities have been studying our species for far longer than we have been aware of their existence. The fact that they can perfectly mimic the voices of loved ones, access intimate personal information, and manipulate our deepest emotional bonds indicates a level of intelligence and supernatural capability that challenges our understanding of what kinds of entities might exist in the hidden places of our world. The voices that call from the darkness of the Appalachian wilderness aren't just trying to lure us into physical danger. They are attempting to hijack our most fundamental human connections and use our capacity for love, loyalty, and compassion as weapons against us. For those who venture into the deep woods of Appalachia, the possibility of hearing their name called from the darkness represents the ultimate test of psychological strength and survival instinct. The entities that create these calls understand exactly how to exploit our deepest emotional vulnerabilities, and they have had centuries to perfect their techniques. The survival wisdom passed down through generations of mountain families. If you hear your name called in the woods, "no, you didn't," represents not just practical advice, but a recognition that some forms of evil are so sophisticated and psychologically dangerous that the only defense is complete rejection of the experience itself, no matter how real or emotionally compelling it might seem. The calling voices serve as a final, terrifying reminder that in the ancient mountains of Appalachia, where the boundary between the natural and supernatural has been worn thin by centuries of human tragedy and loss. There are entities that view human consciousness not as something to be respected or feared, but as a resource to be harvested through the most intimate and cruel psychological manipulation imaginable. In these mountains, where your name spoken in the darkness might be the last sound you ever hear, the greatest danger isn't what you might encounter in the woods. It's what might already know everything about you and be waiting for the perfect moment to call you home.